A Guide to the Majestic Islands of Lakshyadeep. Two large almond eyes lined with yellow coal stare at me. At any rate, I think they stare at me. For all I know, those aren't its eyes at all. I'm not an expert on crabs or any kind of marine life, and there are two other eye-like protrusions on stalks that also seem to be looking at me keenly. We are having a face-off, this large crab and I, on the white sands of Kadmat. I walk on a little and stumble upon a whole colony of small brownish crabs that scuttle away so swiftly I could have dreamed them up. Then a tiny salmon pink shell walks by, home to a bright orange mollusk. Nearby, a small congregation of shells saunters sideways into the sea. The shoreline is a rough, moving edge of coral and shells. The beach here on Kadmat is like a microcosm of the seabed, ridged, alive, with an untamed quality to it. Even the sand is different, with a texture like rice grains, not the fine powdery sand of Thay. Frankly, it's been love at first sight. When I first saw this long narrow island floating like a frond of seaweed, a darker green on green waters, I knew I was hooked. How many times is this allowed really? On this trip to Lakshadweep, I did the fall in love at first sight thing 4 times over. First on the flight, as Agatti emerged from the surf more luscious than any Aphrodite. Next, the Kavarati beach at dusk as the jetty lights came on. Then, Kadmat, and finally Bangaram floating up to meet us as the chopper circled overhead. Lakshadweep is that kind of place, makes you reel a bit, like you've drunk iced gin too fast on a hot summer day. And like a good lover, Lakshadweep is just out of easy reach, still mysterious, difficult, still a little wild. And like a passionate affair, there's no end to the drama. Each time you have to go to another island, you set off sedately in a boat, then suddenly in mid-sea you are met dramatically by a white motor launch with an all-orange crew, straight out of a smuggler movie from the 1970s. You move en masse to that, and then it's a stomach-heaving sail across choppy waves with an attentive steward waving food in your face that you cannot possibly consume. The drama of course started even earlier on this trip. The zillion phone calls to get a permit at 3 days' notice, the pleas to the tourism department to allow us to hop between islands, the heartbreaking realization that there was no way we could include the furthest island of Minikoi into the schedule, and then finally as we approach Agatti, the triumphant peering from the cockpit window as if I were Cortez upon a peak in Darien. But, honestly, when it comes to histrionics, these islands could get an Oscar. Agatti is shaped, aptly, like an elongated exclamation mark, even to the dot under the mark. The plane swoops down to an airstrip that's simply the long, narrow tip of the mark and you touch down, with 2 startlingly different shades of sea on either side. Colors of the sea. This is something I just can't get over. How many colors the sea has here. When I first land, on my right it's a deep midnight blue and on the left it's a bright sticky green. Later, as we sail over to Kavarati, the green is deeper and clearer and it feels like we are cutting across molten glass. And from the beaches you can see strips of color laid out like paint samples, starting from the palest yellow to a lemony green to a moss green, then a dark, almost black green, and then as far as the eye can see that maddening shiny turquoise, a shade you would not dare wear, a shade that would look hopelessly unreal on a painting, a color that looks as if it would stick to your skin like cheap holy gulal. At the Kavarati dock, we are met by the affable Mr. Hussain, the Deputy Managing Director of Sports, the Tourism Department of the islands. With infinite patience, he ensures that we see as much of Lakshadweep as is possible in 4.5 days, which is not close to enough but which makes even the solid Jitendra inquire about packages and such like. Of the 36 islands that comprise Lakshadweep, only 11 are inhabited, and most of the rest are just sandbars, atolls or submerged reefs. The coral was born millennia ago, when life forms first swarmed on the peaks of underwater volcanoes, and slowly grew into small and large islands. In fact, most of the islands are still growing, except the mature islands of Andrat and Amani with no lagoons. So when I revisit Kadmat in 10 years, it will be larger and with a narrower lagoon. But if you went sailing down a vast uncharted ocean and suddenly saw many small land masses dotting the vast expanse, what impulse would make you want to move house across the waves and settle down there? What faith in the sea, what trust in your boats? In the 9th century, legend says, the Raja of Chirakkal from Kannanur, Kerala, sent out a party to sea. The ship was caught in a storm and wrecked on the present island of Bangaram, When the storm abated and the crew sailed back, it reported its findings to the Raja, who promptly promised that those of his subjects who settled there could own the lands. Under those terms, the islands were first colonized, and then converted to Islam by a shipwrecked Arab saint named Ubaidullah.
Subscribe now.